that they have a really sensitive smelling indicator, olfactory sense. We don't smell very well. We don't smell things from far away. We can't discern directionality of smell very well, whereas anybody who owns a dog or any kind of a hound or something like that knows that their sense of smell is tens of thousands of times more sensitive than us. And they would be able to, a dog would be able to live with really reduced vision because they can find food just from the way they smell. But primates tend to be more visual creatures, and part of that may be because of the arboreal adaptations. If you're moving around in trees, you've got to be able to see where you are, especially if you're jumping from branch to branch. You need to have depth perception. I have a friend who lost vision in one of his eyes, and he would always get irritated with me when I would throw like a ball at him or something, because his depth perception was completely shot. He only was able to see out of one eye, and he had lost depth perception. He found it more difficult to drive. So having stereoscopic vision, which is what you and I have and primates have, most primates, I think almost all primates have stereoscopic vision. Try grasping for something with one eye shut, right? And you'll see what I mean. That depth perception allows you to be able to make judgments on distance in an arboreal environment. And because that's so important to survival, moving around in the trees and having depth perception, primates, their bone structure increasingly protects those eyes. If you damage your eyes, you're in deep trouble as a primate. So something like a lemur, which is a form of primate that has more similarities to some of the earliest primates, you see what's called a post-orbital bar. And that's a sort of a minor investment in trying to protect the eyes. A raccoon has no post-orbital bar, and so the eyes are sort of located on the side of the head for a raccoon, and there's very little protection, bone protection around the eye. But it's not, everything in nature has an expense. You've got to build that bone structure, and if it's not that important to you, you'd probably be investing in something else that is important to you, like your nasal cavity in a raccoon. But a lemur is somewhere in between us and a raccoon, right? So a lemur has that post-orbital bar that protects the eyes somewhat without investing too much in bone structure. They also have a bit of a snout, and they have a little bit better sense of smell than us. But something like an ape, or like a gibbon, or even a human, our eyes are completely encased in bone all the way around, and this is what's called a post-orbital closure. So we've got all around the eye orbits is bone. And we also have color vision. And this is a result of us being diurnal, D-I-U-R-N-A-L, sorry, diurnal. That means active during the daytime. The opposite of that is nocturnal. I'm sure you've heard that word, but that's active during the nighttime. But we are diurnal creatures. Almost all but one, in fact, primate is diurnal, and you'll see this in that creature in the video, and they only recently became nocturnal, and they don't actually have particularly good night vision because they haven't evolved that yet. They're relatively recently switched to feeding at night. So having color vision allows you to make sense of the bright colors that are out there during the daytime. We would have different kinds of eyes if we were active during the nighttime. We would have reflectivity that would allow us to see much, much better at nighttime. But you've got to make compromises in nature. You invest in what works, or genetics and natural selection selects those characteristics that work and selects against the ones that are either redundant or a waste of energy. So stereoscopic vision and color vision allows us to make sense of the colors that are useful for us. So some colors tell us that there's poison or there's danger. Some tell us that this is actually really ripe and we should eat it. And that helps us to adapt to different food sources. We also, all primates, have a reduced snout to some extent. Some, like the lemur, it's still maintained as an okay olfactory organ. But you and I, we really don't rely on our sense of smell very much. It's nice to have, but we don't have a snout, and we don't have the sort of even the brain power that corresponds to that. A dog has really good smelling organs, but they also have a lot of brain power devoted to making sense of those inputs. We have other uses for our brain power than making sense of those smells. There's a group of a class of primates called the prosimians that are and prosimian means early ape or original ape. In technical terms, but it's a classification like a lemur that I've talked about before, that has what's called a rhinarium, and that's having a wet nose like a dog. But you and I don't have that, so that's not very similar to us. That's a branch that split off from our line very early on. So you have early primates, and those lemurs split off in another direction not long after these early primates existed. Now, a modern-day lemur is just as evolved as you and I are, but their branch split very early on, and so we are the least like a lemur, because we split from those primates the earliest. We're part of anthropoid, which means human form, primates like a monkey or us. And we have a dry nose that's separated from the lip or separated from the mouth by an upper lip. You might sometimes get confused seeing some types of anthropoids, monkeys and things, like a baboon, because you say, oh, well, they've got a big snout. Well, they do, but that's for different reasons. They actually have really big teeth. And they don't actually have particularly good sense of smell, but they have very big teeth for other reasons. One is for intimidating other males for sexual reproduction and impressing females for the same purpose, and also in part their diet. So they're really big canines in particular need to fit into that mouth, and so they have a long snout to fit their teeth. Not because they have a large sinus cavity and a really advanced olfactory sense. Teeth are extremely important. For one thing, in the fossil record, we have more teeth than any other element of anatomy. That's because they're covered by enamel, and they fossilize much more easily than any other bones. Typically what happens to bones is they decay, they disintegrate, and that's what normally happens. It's only under very rare circumstances that fossilization occurs. But what is required for fossilization to occur is that the bones have got to hold their structure for long enough for the mineralization process to occur. So that happens more frequently with teeth because they're surrounded by this protective coating of enamel. That's really good because teeth are indicative of particular species. You can identify a species of animal very, very precisely from the type of teeth that they have. And also, teeth are sensitive indicators of diet. So if you only have a species' teeth, you can already say quite a bit about it. You can see relationships to other creatures, you can see where on the timeline they are, and you can see what type of environment they were living in and adapting to. Now, when Charles Darwin was first coming up with these concepts of natural selection, he was asking similar questions to what we're talking about now. Although he was trying to classify all life and evolution in general, he was interested in our origins as well. And he proposed that humans found their ancestry in Africa. As we'll see in later chapters, he was correct about that. But what nobody thought is there was a difference of opinion. Some people thought that humans might find their ancestry in Asia, and we'll see that there was good reason for a time to think that. But we now know that that's not the case. At least human ancestry. Primate ancestry may find some of its origins in Asia, but human ancestry in particular does not. But one thing that was never even considered as an option by anybody, Darwin, nobody, was looking for human ancestry in the Americas. There are primates that exist in South America today, and actually fossil record shows that they were in North America as well at a long time ago. But nobody thought that that was going to be our ancestry for a very good reason, and that's the teeth. The kinds of teeth that exist in North America are a different pattern. They're a different kind of teeth, and importantly, they're a different configuration. Something that if you want to say, who's my ancestor, you look for something that is a similar pattern to you. So New World monkeys that exist today, you can see have a pattern of and this is you'll see this in your book. These are numbers, and what it is it's referring to your upper and lower teeth, one half of it. So if you start with your two front teeth, those are your incisors, and you have 1, 2 on this side. You have 1, 2, and 1, 2. So 1, 2 incisors, and then you have one canine. That's your your fang. And it doesn't really go below any of your other teeth, but it is sort of a little pointy thing. And in our cousins, that's actually much bigger teeth. That's the non-honing canine that we have. And then you have 2 premolars and three molars. That's the 2, 1, 2, 3 dental formula. That's what we have. New World monkeys have 2, 1, 3, 2 or 2, 1, 3, 3. So already in the 19th century, we knew that was not really possible to be our ancestors, because Old World monkeys and apes and humans all have the 2, 1, 2, 3 pattern. So Old World meaning Eurasia and Africa. So there was some dispute early on as to whether our ancestry was in Asia or in Africa. We now know that it's Africa, but it was never a contender that human ancestry came from the Americas, the New World. They're a different kind of, a different branch that's separated as the continents separated through plate tectonics about 35 million years ago or so. So we can do even more with teeth, however, because there are monkeys have the same dental formula, that is to say the same number of teeth, but monkeys have a type of, their grinding teeth come together as points that sort of come together as a ridge in the middle of their tooth. This is what's called the bilophodont pattern. And you don't have that. That shouldn't be familiar to you. But apes and us, we have on our lower molars what's called a Y5 pattern. And there's a little Y shape. If you look at the top-down of one of your molars, if you look at your lower molar, there's a little a groove in it that looks like a Y. And apes and us have that. So we have the same kind of teeth as a gorilla, as a chimpanzee, as a gibbon. So this shows, just from the physiology, we can see that there are similarities, that we're coming from the same ancestry as chimpanzees and other apes have. We also have no diastema and no honing canine, and that shows that, and we'll see later on when we started to lose this. There's a period of time where we had what was called the peri-honing canine complex, which was us losing our prominent fangs. An important thing about a lot of these elements that I've been discussing here is we're trying to isolate why we have these physiological characteristics based on adaptations to environmental factors. That's really important. But it's also important to realize that once you have an adaptation, you don't only have to use it for the reason that it was adapted. So, in other words, we have stereoscopic and color vision. And I already explained that that's primarily for moving in and around trees. But can you use it to watch this video and see the colors of the books behind me? Or watch Netflix and see some television show? Of course you can, right? Now, is that the reason why you adapted your stereoscopic color vision? No. You did not evolve your eyes to watch Netflix. But because you have your eyes, you can. So for the same reason, things like having those fangs are, in apes and other types of primates, the primary reason is obviously probably going to be for diet. But once you have those fangs, you can see that they're used for other purposes. In a lot of apes in particular, they're used for sexual selection, that you can infer certain behavioral practices of mating practices by observing primates in their natural habitats. So if you go to a gorilla troop, you will see that the biggest, strongest silverback is going to have a harem of females, and he has exclusive reproductive privileges with that group, as long as he can keep his dominance over other males. And how do you do that? You look big and you look impressive. And one of those ways is having really big, sharp, shiny fangs. So these large canines are used for a social function as well as dietary function. Now, what can you infer when you have the loss of those fangs? Well, you probably don't have the same kind of sexual and social behaviors as a gorilla does. So there is some what's called sexual dimorphism in humans, but it's reduced from what you see in, let's say, a gorilla troop. So what that means is sexual dimorphism is that males are much larger than females. Gorillas, that is obviously true. A male silverback is enormous compared to a female. Human males are somewhat larger than females, but not as it's not as stark of a difference as you get in other types of apes. So you can infer from that that there may be a different social organization. There may be more pair bonding rather than harem having in humans. So even from simple things like whether there are prominent fangs in a species, you can actually, without being there, uniformitarianism tells us that we can actually apply some of these principles into the past and infer behavior that we can't actually be there to observe. Because primates have big brains and they're making the most of lots of opportunities, they also have a great deal of parental investments. Primates usually have one offspring at a time, and they can go several years between births. And this allows for socialization to occur. But it also places a burden on the parents, especially the mothers, who have that offspring to care for a very long period of time. And humans have, amongst primates, the longest period of childhood and care from adults. That you can infer means that we have a much longer period of socialization, which corresponds to the fact that we have the largest brains and we have the most social adaptations that are crucial to our survival. And our brains aren't just bigger, they're also organized differently. And I mentioned this slightly in an earlier, when I was earlier in this lecture, that if you've got a really prominent snout and you're trying to make sense of smells, you've got to have a corresponding part of your brain to make sense of that. And you can see that as things like a strepsirrhine, like a lemur with a long nose, has actually a pretty prominent olfactory bulb, which is the part of the brain that makes sense of smells. So you have a big snout and good sense of smell, you've got to have a big smell sensor in your brain. But as we lose that, you can see that humans, or chimpanzees and humans even less so, have this tiny little shriveled up olfactory bulb in our brains because we're not investing very heavily in making sense of those. But we have investment in other things, like the frontal lobe of our brains, which is memories and making sense of things and creativity. And so we'll come back to some of the aspects of the use of our brain in later chapters. But when you develop different anatomical features, you've also got to have the sort of central mechanisms that make sense of that and make use of that. So there are a lot of different types of primates, and you can see some of them that are still around that you can observe may give us a little bit of a hint at what some of the earliest primates might have looked like. And where we find them may be similar to the environments that they lived in. So a place like Madagascar has lemurs, and that forested environment may be very similar to the forms of prosimians that are some of the earliest adapted primates. And so we can look at the variations and the different branches of primates and look at their environments and see how those adaptations came about. And when we see those adaptations in our history, we can then make inferences about the environmental pressures that we're